Hey there, welcome to dotnetFlix. Today, Jarne is our guest, and he's going to talk about web accessibility. So, Jarne, I'm really curious about that subject. So, can you tell us all about it?
Yeah, of course. So today we're really gonna talk about making our websites more accessible by covering the most basic stuff.
Mhm.
So that after this presentation, you can start with it and kind of like make your own website accessible also.
Cool. Yeah. Show us
All
how
right,
it's done.
I'm gonna do that. All right, let's dive in. So to kick things off, I actually already want to talk about the title. It might be a bit strange, but it's actually the abbreviation for accessibility. You might have seen it already, but it stands for the 11 characters between the A and the Y, spelling
Mhm.
out accessibility. So I'm probably not going to be the first one who is going to say this, but we should really care about web accessibility. And that is because accessibility is useful for everyone, but it is really essential for some people. Some people just can't use your software without accessibility. But it's useful for everyone because everyone is only temporarily abled. Temporarily abled, what do I mean by that? I think the best way to explain it is by talking a bit about Microsoft's inclusive design. Now, Microsoft's inclusive design is kind of like the methodology from Microsoft that they want to make their software accessible for everyone. So, this is one of the images from their website. And let's take hearing, for example. So, you might have somebody who is permanently deaf, but you might also have someone with a ear infection who can't temporarily hear very well. But then you might also have something situational, somebody who is on a busy bus or at a bar who can't also really hear very well. Now, these people might experience different things, but they are in need of the same thing, and that is visual support for your software in this case. So I think that is kind of like the basic gist of it. When talking about accessibility, we are talking about a lot of different groups of people. So the reason for my talk is also a bit tailored towards this slide. Um, if you look at the top 1 million websites, they have some issues. So, more than 80% of them have low contrast ratios. And that is something that might be annoying for people with, for example, color blindness. So, people with color blindness might not be able to then distinguish everything on your website. But then you also have things like alternative text that is missing on images, labels, but also language attributes that are useful for assistive technologies like screen readers, for example. Now, luckily, there are organizations out there who spend time defining rules and requirements for us that we can follow. And one of those organizations is the Web Accessibility Initiative. And they made some guidelines under the name WCAG 2, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And it's a rather big set of rules ranging from having subtitles on videos to having those alternative texts on images, for example. Now, those rules, they are really always based on four principles. So the principles are that all of the content on your website or your software should be perceivable. Perceivable meaning not only visual, but also for people using a screen reader. They should also be able to perceive all of the content of your website that way. But also, all of your content needs to be operable. Everything that is interactive should be interactive, understandable. So this is really talking about languages, but also about other things as well that we will get back on later. And then robustness is really talking about you have some experimental features out there that you could implement, but that is not really a good idea when doing so in production, because then when you might upgrade your browser or it doesn't is supported on all of the browsers, it's kind of like doesn't work. So robustness is really having those proven accessibility features on your website. But now, how do you kind of like distinguish what are the most important rules and what are kind of like optional ones? So the WCAG guidelines, they have kind of like different compliance levels which you can adhere to. You have the A standard, the double A, and the triple A, and all of them adhere to more rules and requirements. So for most of the websites, you will probably aim for the double A standard. I think what I read online with this, you make your website accessible in 99.99% of the cases. If you really want to go all the way, you can just go AAA. But the reason why this is so important is because the European government and also some other countries might have regulations in place that for certain applications, you need to adhere to those compliance levels. So you might be developing an application for the government, and it might say, oh, it needs to adhere to the AA standard of WCAG2, for example. So this is kind of like a basic introduction. We talked about some issues, we talked about rules and requirements and some guidelines. Now let's actually talk about what we can do to make our websites accessible. But before I move on with my slides, I would first actually like to show you a demo application that we will be going back and forward to a few times during this presentation to show off those accessibility features. All right, so I made a little dotnetFlix website for you guys. And this is kind of like a basic website where you could view the most recent videos from dotnetFlix. And the
Cool.
basic idea of this website is to kind of like be the completionist and really watch all of the .NET Flix videos. I mean, who doesn't want to do that, right? So you can mark videos as watched, and there is a basic count here that keeps track of the videos that you've already watched. And you also have an option here to clear the watched videos if you want to do that, for example, and also some basic navigation with also a dual barrel roll functionality, because I mean, then you can also view your websites from all different angles, and that's also accessibility in itself, right?
Right.
um, so this is kind of like the basic website, and we will be coming back a few times to this website when we are talking about some theory. But let's actually go back now and let's start talking about semantics first. So, semantics, you might have seen some HTML structures like this, right? A lot of divs and then maybe some other elements as well. Now, the people who use a lot of divs might say, well, a div can do anything, right? So, and while that's true, I mean, a div is the most versatile element, and it's also very easy to style in various ways. But it might come to no surprise here that a div shouldn't do everything. But it might not be of the reason that you think of. So it's not because then it's more readable for developers. But one of the primary reasons is that then also for screen readers, it provides more context. So, for example, here, the first block, you might change that into a navigation tag. And when you use a screen reader, it will then read out loud navigation. So it really has some purpose to use your HTML tags to have that semantic meaning. This is also a very interesting one. So the button versus anchor tag, I really like this discussion. But maybe to first explain some stuff. So you have a button and you have an anchor tag, and both of these elements are interactive elements. So in general, buttons are really used to do stuff, and anchor tags are really used to go places, navigational purposes. Now, some people might say, well, I just use a button for everything, right? And I can just use some JavaScript magic to make it navigate. But the reality is that a button really shouldn't do everything, because An anchor tag also comes with some really useful features out of the box, like, for example, shift clicking to open a new tab, but also your browser history. And I can actually show you guys that real quickly here on the dotnetFlix website. I made one of the links to be a button. Let's say that I, for example, click one of the real links here. You might have options like open link in new tab, open link in new window. And it's you can also believe me here that if I click the link, it will kind of like open a new tab if I shift click on it, and you will also have browser history supported. But if I right click here, you don't have those options. So I think the basic gist here is that you really need to have those anchor tags for navigational purposes, because you really get a lot of out of the box for them. Now, that was just a really quick talk about semantics, but this is kind of like the core of the session of today. So let's talk about labeling, and more specifically about area labeling. So you might have heard or seen this abbreviation before, but area stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. You might have seen also area attributes in your HTML code already, but what are area attributes anyway? So area attributes are used to provide additional information to assistive technologies, like, for example, screen readers. They are also used to notify assistive technologies of changes that might occur on your website. You might have some dynamic elements on your website, and you also want to notify users of that. And you are also able with area attributes to kind of like define specific roles to elements to give them more semantic meaning. We'll come back to that latest one in just a moment. Now, there are a lot of different area attributes that you can use. These are the most common ones, and these are the ones that we're also quickly going to cover today. So let's actually start with the first one here. So the area label, this is the most common one of them all, and it's used to actually provide more context to a specific interactive element. So for example, here you might have a button with only an icon in it. And if you didn't provide any additional context, then using a screen reader here would not be a very nice experience, because it wouldn't kind of like give that context to the user. So having that area label will let the screen reader read out loud that extra context. And we will see all of those cases just in a moment on the website. But let's first go through them all. So the second one, the area label by, is also a really interesting one. So with this one, you can actually define relationships between elements. So here, for example, you might have a date picker, and then you might want to reference the content of the date picker to the correct months so that the user has that context. But here you also might want to use area controls. It's kind of like similar to area labeled by, but this kind of like specifies that one element controls the other. So here you might, for example, have a tab list. And here in that tab list, you might be able to then notify the user that content is changing, or that content is gonna change by using that element. Now, the area hidden one, this is a pretty simple one, but it kind of like just hides stuff from assistive technologies. So maybe here, for example, you want to hide the check marks from screen readers, you can do that. The area expanded, also a really useful one. This one can be used to set on collapsible and expandable elements. So you might have, for example, a navigational structure that you can expand or collapse. And this is a way that you could also give that extra context to the screen reader. Now, the area live, this is also a pretty interesting one. So this is the one that's going to be used to dynamically give updates to the user of what's happening on your website. So here, for example, you might have an area live attribute on your date picker, and then when you use the arrow keys to change the months, the user will be notified of that. So you will be notified of the fact that you're looking at new months. You have two options here. You have the polite option, which is going to wait for announcing the change if the screen reader is currently saying something. But then you also have the assertive option. And in case of assertive, it's going to immediately say the update. It's going to interrupt the screen reader. And choosing the one or the other, it really depends on, again, the context that you're trying to create. Now, the area selected is also pretty straightforward. So here for the area selected, um, you can also give the context that something might be pre-selected. Here, for example, with a date picker, but you could also imagine it with, for example, a radio button group where a radio button might be already selected. Area modal, this is the last one. So here with area modal, you could actually put that on things like side overlays or pop-ups, things that are kind of like come in front of the whole screen. And the reason for putting an area modal on your pop-ups, for example, is to give the screen reader the context that all of the content behind the pop-up is no longer interactive. It kind of like creates a focus trap for the accessibility user to only focus in the content on front. So it's also really useful to have. Now the role attribute, as I talked about before, the role attribute is really used to give more semantic meaning to your existing HTML structure. So, for example, you might have something like an alert dialog role on a pop-up that overlays atop of your website. What's also really interesting about roles is that they might already come implicitly with some area attributes. So, for example, using the alert dialog role will already enable the area modal true attribute for you behind the screens. You don't need to explicitly set it anymore, it will already be done. But you might also have roles, for example, like tab list, that just really give extra context, and it will then, when you focus on that element, just read out loud tab list. Now, I think I talked enough. I think it would be nice to actually go back to the website now and actually enable the voiceover assistant of Mac and actually see what kind of accessibility features that I have built into this website. So let's actually do that now. Let's actually find a good point to start with. So let's enable the voiceover assistant of Mac.
Voiceover on Chrome. .NetFlix videos. Google Chrome. Window. Visited. Link. Watch video. Has keyboard focus.
All right. So I'll let it just speak out for a moment. But let's actually start with the first thing here, being the area labels. So you might have noticed already the Mark as Watched button doesn't really have any text. So if I weren't to provide an area label here, then it might read out something like this.
Button. Group.
So button group, yeah, that's not really giving any context to the user, right? So I actually only did it for the first button. So let's actually navigate towards the next button and see what happens when you have an area label.
Mark as watched. Button. Group.
So in this case, I added an area label marked as watched, and you can see it really gives more context to the user. Now, you might also have noticed here that it skipped over the header of the second item here. And that is because I put a area hidden attribute on it, just to showcase you that for those elements, it's gonna skip over using the screen reader. Now let's actually mark a video as watched and see what happens.
1 videos watched.
So you can ignore the grammar here, but the real fun is actually in the fact that it announced a dynamic update. So my label here, 1 videos watched, has updated, and the screen reader notified me of that. And that is because the area live attribute is present on this item. Now let's actually see what happens when I go to the second Mark as Watch button and I don't let the screen reader speak out, and I will just immediately press the button.
Heading mark as watched button. Group 2 videos watched.
So you see, it waited for announcing the update after it was done speaking. That's because I put the polite option on my area label. Could also have used assertive, but I didn't feel the need here. Now, you might also have seen in this case, when I go back to the title,
Heading level 2. Use the decorator, mediator, and chain of responsibility pattern in C number.
so here it just reads out the title as normal because there is no area hidden attribute on it. Now let's actually just clear the watch videos because I'm gonna have to be honest, guys. I haven't watched those videos yet. I promise you, I'm gonna do it. But for now, to be fair, I'm just gonna clear the watched
Clear
videos.
watched videos button.
All right. So this is my pop-up. And let's actually see what happens when I navigate towards the first button here, the yes button.
Yes button. Are you sure you want to clear the watched videos? Alert dialog.
Okay, so a few things happened here. So instead of just reading yes button, it also read the description of the pop-up and also read the fact that it's an alert dialog. So the fact that it read out the description of the dialog is because I put an area labeled by attribute on the description and linked it to the yes button. And the fact that it's also an alert dialog is because I put a role alert dialog on it, and it will also prevent the user from going outside of this alert dialog. So I could, for example, go to the end
Cancel.
here.
End of. Are you sure you want to clear the watched videos? Alert dialog.
And I can't move out of this. So I'm really stuck until I choose one or the other option. So let's actually press the yes button here and go to the navigation structure.
Open menu button banner.
All right. So here we're now at the top of the website. And here again, I just have a normal hamburger menu with a button. So the open menu is also again an area label to provide more context to the user. Now let's actually open the menu and immediately navigate to the close button of the navigation.
Close menu button navigation.
Okay, so here it again says close menu as an area label, but it also says that's going to close a navigation. And that is because there is an area controls label on the button here, and it's linked to the navigation structure. Now, what's really interesting here is because it's linked to a nav tag, it knows that it's navigation and it's going to read out that it's going to close a navigation. So this is really the whole picture working together, everything working together to provide a good experience for the user. Now, one final thing to might wrap up with here is the fact that for those menu items here, I also gave the menu item to the role menu item to say to the first item here.
About me, menu item.
So here we have menu item. If I weren't have given this any role, because those are just anchor tags, it would have read out a bit differently.
Visited link. Do a barrel roll.
So yeah, this is kind of like, in general, the accessibility features that I implemented in my website. And I really hope that with this, you kind of get a basic feeling that those area attributes, they really contribute to the context that the screen reader has.
And one more item, group.
So let's actually
open menu
disable
button.
the voiceover assistant again.
Voiceover off.
Okay, great. So let's actually navigate back to the slides here. I actually want to finish with some honorable mentions. So we had the main part here, but I also quickly want to talk about keyboard navigation and visual effects. So visual tab focus for non-interactive elements. So you might have seen already for buttons and anchors, the visual tab focus, it comes out of the box. You don't need to do anything for that. But you might also have cases here, for example, where you have a list with list items in them, where you want to style the list items to also have a tab focus. So just a little thing to keep in mind. Those are little things that might also improve your accessibility. Now, this is also pretty nice. So you kind of like have skip links. So skip links, if you never heard of them before, they're kind of like hidden buttons at the beginning of navigation. So you might have websites with a pretty big navigation structure, like for example YouTube, and when you try and start using the tab key, it will show a button, skip navigation. And if you press this button, then the next step will immediately take you to the content. So it will just skip the entire navigation. Now, YouTube didn't invent this, but there are a lot of different websites out there that have this functionality. And you can try it at home if you want. So go to YouTube and press tab a few times, and that button will pop up. All right, so the usage of the escape key, also a pretty important one. So you might have a pop-up like mine on the dotnetFlix website, and you might want to close it with the escape key. So that is a pretty simple scenario, right? But you might also have scenarios, as here in this image, where you need to press the escape key multiple times to return kind of like to the main page of the website again. So here you need to press the escape key 3 times to return to the website. And you really need to think about a good way of implementing that if you want to cover those cases. This is also an interesting one. Also a pretty straightforward one, I have to say, but highlight clickable elements. I say straightforward, but then again, I go to websites and I just hover over elements, expect them to be interactive, and they are, but there is no visual indication whatsoever that they are interactive. So it doesn't take a lot of time in CSS, just provides some indication that your elements are interactive. And then the last one here, that is contrast. I needed to get rid of the names because those were names of real people. But for the example here, it doesn't matter because on the left side here, you see a delegated tag, but on the right side, you don't see that tag anymore. And that is because it has the same color as the highlighted effect. So this is kind of like to give you a little case where it might be useful to keep contrast in mind. Just gonna quickly wrap up here. So, what did we talk about? So, we started with talking a bit about Microsoft Inclusive Design, the fact that the top 1 million websites they have some issues, but then we also talked about the rules and requirements that we could follow from WCAG 2. Then I showed you guys some things about semantics, and then the basic bulk of this session went towards labeling the area labels. And I finished with some honorable mentions regarding keyboard navigation and visual effects. Now, I want to leave you with one question today, or with one answer to this question. So, after this session, what can you do? My advice would be to start simple. So, you've seen a lot of different stuff in this session. I would advise you, if you have a website that you have been working on, for example, to start with the really simple things. Start having a look at your semantic structure of your website, and maybe also try and use those area labels as a first introduction to using area tags in general. So this was kind of like my talk. So I hope that you guys liked it. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jarna. Really interesting. Yeah, and it really got me thinking about our BitBash website. So BitBash is this conference that we are organizing, and at the last keynote, at the last edition, Marco Kuiper, he did a presentation on how to, well, not really carbon neutral, but how to minimize the waste, basically, that your site produces. And he ran our website through this tool, which calculated how much carbon it used, and it used way too much carbon because there were images in there that weren't properly minimized, stuff like that. So I was wondering, are there any tools that you know of that we can use to run against our website and get some idea of the accessibility of the site?
Yeah, indeed. there is a very simple built-in feature. If you open the developer tools in, for example, Google Chrome, you have a
Mhm.
function that is called Lighthouse, and Lighthouse will actually give you a report when you run it over your website, and it will also include an accessibility report. It will give you a score, and it will give you some points where you might could improve.
Very cool. So we definitely need to look into that. So another thing that that I read about recently, I thought it was interesting because you were talking about those area labels. Is on one of the projects that I'm involved with, we were playing around with Playwright. Now it's this Microsoft's testing framework for UI tests. And when you write those UI tests, you of course need some way to reference your elements in your web page, and you can use IDs for that. Um, but there was this blog post that explained you can also use those area labels to create your UI test. And I think that's also very interesting because then basically you get this win-win situation. You can run your UI tests and you get some free accessibility out of the box directly.
Exactly. If the business doesn't like that, then I don't know.
Exactly. So talking about a business, in you were doing various projects for various customers, right? So is this something that is top of mind, or is it more something that needs to come from the developers themselves? How do you deal with that on your real world projects?
That's actually a pretty good question. Of course, my general answer here is it would depend. But I have been with companies who already have those accessibility guidelines in place. So it might be part of the definition of done from
Right.
work items that you do as a developer. But there are also places that don't really think a lot about accessibility up front. And here, my advice would really be to start creating awareness by doing the little things right. Maybe already just start using area labels anyway. I mean, there might be in a pull request, a developer might see them. He might ask, "Oh, what is this?" And you can just explain it to him. And it might be a fire that then that way can catch on.
Yeah. So start from the bottom up and start. Well, I guess you can make some big impact already by just having those small, simple, basic change to your website, right?
I'm actually
Exactly.
thinking about a co-pilot for your IDE that will actually scan your code and then give you some suggestions for tags to add. That would also be pretty cool. I don't know if that's already out there, but if people are watching, maybe that's a good
Oh,
one to
well,
consider.
we should try just asking Copilot, hey, here's my webpage. Please add some
Exactly.
area labels. It should be pretty
Yeah,
good for that.
should be doable. So yeah, well, let's try that. It's a good experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
indeed.
we've got homework.
Yep.
So, Jarne, once again, thank you very much. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed
Thanks.
your talk.
Thank you
For
for
those
having me,
of you,
guys.
yeah, and yeah, definitely be back sometime. Yeah.
I will.
So you were talking at Future Tech this month. Is this the same? Is this the talk you're going to do at Future Tech, or do you have another topic?
Actually, future tech is going to be another topic. There, I'm going to talk about hot compatibility.
Mhm.
But I am going to talk about web accessibility during .NET Saturday in the Netherlands.
Which
Also
is
next month.
the end of May.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So we'll
Yep.
see you there. For those of you watching, if you like the episode, please like and subscribe. It really helps a lot. And we'll see you at the next one. Bye bye.
Yep. Right.